How can Mushoku Tensei, the anime with a main character that's a perverted creep, be the most realistic and human anime ever created? Simultaneously being head of one of the biggest anime controversies and being heralded as a masterpiece, Mushoku Tensei finds itself stuck between a rock and a scumbag. Having what may be the most hated main character in all of animation and dealing with many rather disturbing and understandably uncomfortable topics, there is a moral quandary that Mushoku Tensei raises. Is it possible that this so-called masterpiece falls to the disgusting actions of its main character, or could it have some of the most important philosophical value in anime? Because I think it's possible that Rudius may actually be a morally good person, and that on a philosophical level, Mushoku Tensei could be an extremely realistic depiction of what it means to be human. Part 1. Rudius sucks. Like, a lot. When I ask you what makes us human, what comes to mind? Or rather, what makes us unique as humans? What makes us individuals? After some thought, most people come out with answers along the lines of our beliefs, our desires, what actions we take, and what we feel. These innate parts of being human can be categorized under two simple terms: morals, what we think is right and wrong, and ethics, what actions we take to be morally good or bad. In order to truly classify Mushoku Tensei as one of the most realistic and human anime, it needs to be able to portray within its characters a strong, compelling, and accurate sense of morality and ethical decision-making. Unfortunately, there's no way around it. Mushoku Tensei is gross. The first few episodes are borderline horrendous half the time, and I can't say I judge anyone who would be put off by how the anime begins. My first time around, I dropped the show at episode 2, physically cringing at some of the actions and thoughts that Rudius managed to conjure up in his disgusting little perverted mind. Rudius just sucks. He does all sorts of awful things throughout the show that can't really be justified. Or can they? Rudius, a 34-year-old man reborn into a new family in a new world, starting as an infant but retaining all of his memories from his previous life, is nothing more than a child. It's obviously reflexive to think of him solely as a 34-year-old in the body of a kid, but I don't think that's completely accurate to the situation Mushoku Tensei presents. Looking into Rudius in his previous life, we come to find a fairly pathetic list. He doesn't have a job and never leaves his room, so he's a shut-in NEET. Never leaving his room and losing his last and only friend, over the years he's lost the ability to socialize properly. He doesn't have the willpower or desire to put himself back together, nor to even go to his parents' funeral, so he's got no motivation or commitment. He's constantly high on himself and has no sense of humility. And finally, he has no sense of right or wrong, only taking actions to avoid possible consequences or punishment. To me, it seems that we have a severe case of what is called arrested psychological development. Arrested psychological development is a psychological occurrence in which someone who has experienced severe trauma, in this case Rudius's extreme bullying, regresses to a childlike behavior later in life that reflects the age at which they experienced the initial trauma. When coupled with Rudius's extreme depression for almost 2 entire decades, it's reasonable to say that his brain has stagnated at the developmental level of a child. Furthermore, using Lawrence Kohlberg's theory of moral development, we can grade Rudius's morality based on average morality development by age. When doing this, we find that Rudius falls under the obedience/punishment stage during the first few episodes, no difference between doing the right thing and avoiding punishment, and only reaches the self-interested stage a few episodes later, shifting to rewards rather than just avoiding punishment, causing his moral development to reflect that of a preschooler, which actually matches his newfound physical age. Even more so, he's lived the life of a child for years. Everyone around him treats him like a child, the only people that treat him as equals are children, and every time he looks in the mirror, he sees a child. It's reasonable that his mental development could easily change and reflect the world he now finds himself in. This all supports the idea that we should look at Rudius as more of a child in mind and a child in body, but with the knowledge of an older man, though not a very educated or experienced one. As such, we should judge Rudius's thoughts and actions more as the prodigy child that he is, rather than what he once was. Part 1.5. Rudius might be good. Kinda. Now that we have an understanding of who Rudius is, all we need to figure out is how to measure if he, and any other characters for that matter, are morally good, ethical people. Enter Aristotle and virtue theory. Aristotle believed that being virtuous was to be a good person, and that people had different capabilities, causing one's virtuous actions to change based on their capabilities in their given situation. So, what does it mean to act virtuously? Courage, patience, generosity, and truthfulness are a few examples of different virtues. They are things that we automatically identify as good traits within other people. Knowing how to act virtuously, however, is a little more complicated. Taking courage as an example, imagine you're in a train station with only a handful of other people around. Suddenly, a rather large man falls, breaks his leg, and cannot get off the tracks. Knowing that a train is coming, how should the courageous person act? It's easy to say that the courageous person is one that would rush over and help, but Aristotle would actually disagree. According to virtue theory, you should first evaluate your capabilities so that you can act accordingly. Now, I don't know just how strong you are or are not, but I sure as hell couldn't lift a couple 100-pound man up and off the tracks by myself. Because of this, it could be that the courageous thing for me to do would actually be to go get an authority who could stop the train and help the man, rather than to helplessly try to achieve the impossible. That being said, if it's a small child that falls, then it could stand to reason that the courageous thing to do in your situation would be to help the kid yourself, given your capabilities. Virtue theory says that courage is a median between two vices, cowardice being a deficiency of courage, and rashness being an excess of courage. This middle point, changing from person to person, is known as the golden mean. And as long as one takes actions that align with their capabilities, then one is virtuous and thus a good person. What do you think? According to this golden mean, is Rudius a good person, or is he truly the worst protagonist of all time? Anyone who's watched only the first couple of episodes almost certainly is going to say that he's awful and should be locked up, while people who have watched all of the anime up to this point are more likely to say something along the lines of, I don't know if he's good, but he seems to be getting better. And it's within that uncertain line that we can come to find the value of this exemplary show. See, the question was never about Rudius being good or bad. The question was about how realistic and human the show can be. At the beginning of the video, I questioned if Mushoku Tensei can portray within its characters a strong, compelling, and accurate sense of morality and ethical decision making. Furthermore, it's certainly accurate to say that an accurate portrayal of human morality is to fuck up. And I mean fuck up a lot. There are two key words that should not be overlooked in the statement, I don't know if he's good, but he seems to be getting better. Getting better is of important note. Turns out, a commonality between all of us is that we all have flaws, some glaring and some minor, but they're definitely all around us. We are not simply born good people. We have to learn and work to become good people, and it's within such work we become the people we are, every day either failing or succeeding at becoming better people than we were the day before. Rudius, as well as many other characters, may not currently meet their golden mean, but they do have the desire to achieve something bigger than they currently are. They innately strive to become good, some having much larger hurdles to cross than others. Part 2. The human condition. Earlier, we asked and answered the question of what it means to be human in an individual sense. This time, I want you to take a moment and think about what you think every human will experience, have, and or know. In short, what is the human condition? While there are many things that everyone will have to do at one point or another, it seems that of the list, the most prolific ones are as follows: live, suffer, and die. Yeah, I know, sounds rather pessimistic, but stick with me for a second. While I do certainly hope everyone will have the chance to obtain a happy life, it is definitely not certain. What is certain, however, is that every person to ever live, and that ever will live, has or will suffer from/because of one thing or another. Same with living and dying. And while suffering sounds bad, it might not actually be bad. Suffering is what forges us. If you want to grow, you'll have to do something that sucks, i.e., suffer. And if you want to achieve your golden mean, you'll have to act in accordance with your capabilities, which can often lead to some level of strife. Want a degree? You're gonna have to take classes and study. Want to have kids? Good luck with sleepless nights. Want to be an isekai protagonist and slay the Demon King? Unless you're lucky enough to be one of the OP ones, you're gonna have to work like hell to fight your way to the top. Anything you could desire to have or desire to become will require you to undergo some level of suffering. No matter if your life is great or if it sucks, you'll have to make peace with the fact that the cost of living is to eventually die and to suffer along the way. But remembering that within that suffering can come greatness, and that it is in some way a requirement to achieve the success you want, you can come to lead a happy life. This is in part what makes Mushoku Tensei so realistic. It understands that it is innate to the human experience to be imperfect, to suffer from one ailment or another. It understands that every single person has flaws that hold them back, and yet also gives them a chance to overcome and become greater than they previously were. If we take a moment to think, it's not hard to realize that every character in Mushoku Tensei has flaws. They're all imperfect. It's part of what makes this show and the world feel so alive, so human. Many anime tend to focus on one or two of the most important characters, and most shows don't even give a second thought to who half the characters you meet are beyond the short interactions needed to further the plot. But seriously, look at every character in Mushoku Tensei. They each have, at minimum, one painfully obvious flaw that makes them feel more human. Arrogant, alcoholic, poor communication abilities, parental issues, dogmatic, doesn't know how to stand up for themselves, loyal to a fault, foolhardy, gambler, literally insane, extortionist, resorts to violence, sexual deviant, and finally, too cute. Perhaps the best example of this is found between Rudius and his father Paul. Later in the show, after a shocking reunion, they simultaneously recognize each other's faults, ending up in a heavy argument involving each one's disappointment in the other. First, Paul explains his grievances with his son's actions. Only thinking about his son as the extremely capable prodigy child, Paul gets overtly upset when he comes to learn that Rudius never took the time to so much as think about what happened to everyone after the Mana disaster, much less actually spend the time trying to locate and assist those who were in need. He judges his son for playing the role of hero without actually taking up the responsibilities he should have if he truly wanted to be one. Then, when Rudius comments on his father's newfound and rather lewd companion, Paul resorts to violence and punches his child in the face. A physical altercation ensues between the two where Rudius valiantly tries to justify his inactions, all while continuously pummeling his father's face. They each had higher expectations for one another, and upon noticing how the other had failed to achieve such expectations, they neglected to realize just how disastrous the Mana disaster had treated them both. However, before leaving, Rudius gets the rude awakening of acknowledging his own shortcomings. He's told that much of his family has not yet been found. Sulking away, he reflects on how his inaction has conceivably led to the deaths of individuals he could have and should have been fighting to protect. Mushoku Tensei has an incredibly special way of toying with our expectations, setting up a whole storyline only to thereafter completely subvert it in favor of something completely unrelated. In the beginning, it seems that the story will be rather straightforward. Rudius simply tries to earn the money to get himself and Sylphia into Magic University, but shortly thereafter, a whole new plot direction within the Mana disaster is unveiled. This is another way in which Mushoku Tensei is painfully realistic, depicting how life loves to, despite your best thought-through plans, throw you for one hell of a loop you would never have seen coming. Going back to Paul and Rudius' reunion, what makes this specific part of the anime so undoubtedly great, and frankly good enough in itself to justify watching through the first few horrendous episodes, is that both of the stuck-up, hard-headed gray rats eventually come out the end following that vital note we talked about earlier. Paul and Rudius each end up becoming better than they were before. Part 2.5. Acceptance of responsibility. One of the core virtues of this anime is its portrayal of people accepting responsibility. After all, the most important part of growing and becoming a better person is to take on the responsibilities that you have been avoiding or never encountering. Doing so is what causes you to learn and gain the experience needed to advance towards your golden mean. And it is with the acceptance of responsibility that one can come to find meaning in their life. Paul, upon seeing his reflection in a small puddle, realizes how pathetic he's become, that he's let himself go. His unshaven face and sunken eyes are a warning sign, showing him that he needs to, once again, pull himself back together and face his responsibilities head first. And that he does. Despite his many flaws, he comes out in the end seeming like a somewhat admirable man. And it didn't take much. All he had to do was take note of how important his family was to him, then reinstill the burden of bringing them back together. He cleans up his appearance, acknowledges acknowledges his goals and how he needs to act to achieve them, then he faces his son a better man, and as a father worth being a son too. It's these very actions that can lead us to thinking that despite the fact that he both cheated on his wife and punched his son, he may actually be a somewhat decent person because of the responsibilities he took on. The same goes for Rudius. Throughout the anime, there are countless points where it just feels like Rudius is letting us down, that he's not grown and is instead just a petulant little shit. Though, soon after, some event always ensues and he's somehow always able to take up the reins and be not only a decent person, but a somewhat worthy leader. When he decides to go to Magic University with Sylphie, he takes on a job tutoring Eris to make the money needed. When faced with the Mana disaster, he rises up and ensures that he protects Eris and gets her home safe. And when he found out his family was missing and got an idea of where to look, he took it upon himself to rescue them. Every one of these events are closely preceded by some perverted scene where you almost lose hope in Rudius' character, and perhaps even question why you're watching the show to begin with. Yet, there's always a reason to find Rudius a little bit better of a person by the end of each episode. It's because, in spite of all of his heinous actions, he takes up his duties and tries to act with good intent that we can view him as a somewhat worthy character. But none of this actually justifies Rudius' actions. And that's not really what the show is trying to do. The point of Rudius' character is that he is constantly getting punished for his shitty decisions and is forced to change to become a better person that he's capable of being. He's not simply allowed to be a miscreant, but rather is pushed in the direction of becoming someone who adopts responsibilities to find meaning in life, which couldn't be found in his hedonistic misdoings. The anime in reality doesn't glorify or praise his actions, but rather uses them to show the audience how Rudius is changing, that he is no longer falling to the many temptations that he once would have, and that he is actively choosing to do right by other people. Rudius got a chance to start over, to start from zero. His character is perfectly made to further accentuate the true theme of Mushoku Tensei, the driving concept behind everything that happens and what makes everything about Mushoku Tensei and its characters all realistic and human. Every single character perfectly illustrates the theme of Part 3, Maturity. Mushoku Tensei at its very core is an anime about maturity. Obviously, we've talked about how the characters grow throughout the show, so how does that work into maturity, and what exactly even is maturity? It is often thought that maturity is equal to being an adult. However, the fully grown man-child is not mature because of his age, and the minor who drinks is not mature due to their actions. So, how do we make sense of this? Earlier, I mentioned Kohlberg's stages of moral development. In his theory, the final stage is described as universal principles and states that at this point, one should recognize that there is some set of moral principles to follow, and that one should choose to do what is right even when it might seem out of place. In large part, maturity is about developing a healthy worldview, about removing one's self-centered thinking and making a valiant attempt at understanding and adhering to ethical principles. Forming a comprehensive ethical belief system and having your actions align with said beliefs are paramount to becoming mature. And being willing to listen to others' beliefs while making an attempt to think critically about both their and your opinions is necessary for maturity. If I were to sum up maturity as simply as I possibly could, it would be something along the lines of identifying within yourself both the good and the bad, then choosing to take care of yourself until you reach a point where you can then take care of others. And that's why I think the main purpose behind Mushoku Tensei is to demonstrate what one goes through to become an adult, and to represent what it takes to become a mature and morally good person. Mushoku Tensei's story is telling us that no matter who we are, where we come from, or what may limit our current selves, that we have a chance to mature, a chance to become who we could truly be, a chance to meet our golden mean. Perhaps Mushoku Tensei's greatest depiction of this is found within the concept of a rite of passage. Many cultures throughout history, and even a decent amount today, choose to have children or young adults go through some sort of tough challenge to have the claim of becoming mature. As for Mushoku Tensei, it seems that from the start of the Mana disaster all the way to finding their way back home was, in some form, a rite of passage for the rather young Rudius and Eris. It's quite clear that they faced many challenges along the way, especially for people of their age and their experience. It's quite obvious that both of them, and even Ruijerd in some ways, come out the end as extremely different people after many months of shared hardship. The lessons learned and experiences gained led them to become better in many categories. Better fighters, thinkers, socializers, and even friends. As the anime continues, we start to see Rudius care more about ethical principles and other people over his own self-interest. Though he is certainly not the greatest person even by the end of the season, he's still a hell of a lot better than who he was at the beginning. He chooses to treat Eris much more humanely and much less, though still somewhat, pervertedly. He takes it upon himself to help Ruijerd with a superb name. He saves some of his family and shows Eris home safely. He's met some of the maturity criteria, recognizing ethical principles, noting when he's acting bad and making an effort to change, and eventually taking it onto himself to help others when needed. He's perfectly demonstrated the process of growing up, going from an outrageously childish kid to a fairly mature young adult. And that's precisely the point of Mushoku Tensei. It's meant to mirror the lives of everyone watching the anime and their growth throughout. Everyone slips up, everyone fails, and everyone has acted poorly at one point or another. It's an innate part of being human to fuck up. Mushoku Tensei realizes this and tells us a story hoping to demonstrate how no matter what ails us, no matter what position we find ourselves in, we will always have the chance to straighten ourselves out. We can mature and become better people. We can learn to adopt ethical principles, and we can choose to look inward for our problems and thus find eventual solutions, rather than simply blaming the world for the hand we've been dealt. I'm sure you can relate in some way or at some point to Rudius at the end of the season, a lost, confused, and disheartened person who's found themselves suddenly thrust into the world of being an adult all alone. It's an unfortunate reality that most people will face at one point or another. But if you take onto yourself the time and step up and forge yourself into the person you are capable of being, rise up when times are the toughest, suffer for the sake of greatness, accept responsibility into your life, and try every day to become better than you were the day before, no matter how slow and unsteady your growth, you will achieve your golden mean. You will find meaning in life, and you will become who you are meant to be.